Welcome to the Global WarWatch Network. Today, we're zeroing in on a story that's, well, as perplexing as it is critical for national security. Here's the situation we're tackling. Nearly 40 years, billions spent, and still no working jet engine for India's fighter program. So why has India struggled to build even a fourth-gen fighter engine while, the rest of the world is already talking about sixth-gen tech? Let's try and break it down.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got some compelling sources lined up for you, mainly from Defense Express and various analyses focusing on India's Kaveri jet engine program. For almost 4 decades now, this project represented a major push for defense self-reliance. But the results, they tell a very different story. You might be asking yourself, how does a nation with India's kind of ambition stumble on something seemingly so fundamental? We're going to explore the journey, the roadblocks, and maybe some surprising lessons learned. So let's set the scene. This all kicked off way back in 1986. What was the big idea, the vision behind the Kaveri engine program back then?
Well, what's really fascinating here is just the sheer scale of the ambition. India launched the Kaveri program in '86 with a very clear goal, achieve independence in its defense sector. They wanted a homegrown power plant specifically for their own fighter jet, the Indigenous fourth-generation Tejas, and the original timeline. Incredibly optimistic. They were aiming to have it done by 1996.
Wow. Okay, so a 10-year plan for a cutting-edge jet engine from scratch, essentially.
Exactly.
There. And here's where it gets really interesting, because you fast forward nearly 40 years, and we're sitting here in 2025. What's the actual status of that dream today?
Well, the stark reality is the Kaveri project remains unfinished. Despite, as you said, almost 4 decades of development and a budget that's ballooned more than 6 times, we're talking over $280 million US, it hasn't actually delivered a usable engine for the Tejas fighter. As of late 2024, December, I believe, it was only cleared for what they called limited flight testing, which is, well, it's a step, but it's far from operational deployment.
That is a staggering amount of time and resources for essentially no operational engine. Especially, like you said, when the cutting edge has moved so far ahead, people are talking sixth-gen fighters now.
It puts the gap into sharp relief.
So let's dig into why. Why all the delays? Were there fundamental performance problems with the Kaveri engine itself?
Oh, absolutely. That's been a consistent theme. Over the decades, the Kaveri prototypes repeatedly failed to deliver the required thrust needed for a modern fighter jet in operational conditions. And it wasn't just about thrust either. The program has battled persistent issues with excessive weight, serious reliability concerns, overheating problems, durability questions, and a poor thrust-to-weight ratio. That last one's critical for fighter agility.
Those sound like pretty fundamental flaws for an engine meant for combat aircraft. I mean, reliability, thrust, weight.
Exactly. These aren't minor teething problems, they're core performance issues.
So how does its performance actually stack up against engines that do work, engines currently in service?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, the Kaveri hasn't even come close to the standards set by established fourth-generation engines. Think about, say, the French Safran M88 that powers the Rafale, or the American General Electric F404. And what's really telling, maybe even a bit ironic, is that the GE F404, the engine that currently powers India's Tejas, because the Kaveri isn't ready, that F404 was designed back in the 1970s.
In 1970s.
Yes. So the Kaveri, after nearly 40 years, still can't reliably match the performance of an engine designed from the 70s. And this is while India is setting its sights on developing a fifth-generation aircraft.
That really underscores the scale of the challenge, doesn't it? You'd assume after all that time, you would at least meet the basic fourth-gen standards.
You'd think so.
But this sounds like it might be more than just engineering difficulties hitting roadblocks. What does the Indian media point to as this sort of core reason for these seemingly endless delays?
And that raises a really important point. Because the consensus, looking at analysis both inside and outside India, is that the key reason isn't purely technical. It's seen as largely organizational. Poor management is cited very frequently as a root cause. There seems to have been a lack, right from the start, of a truly realistic assessment of India's actual industrial capabilities at the time. The goals might have outstripped the means.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just about the science or the engineering challenges, but more about how the entire effort, the whole program, was structured and managed.
Precisely. That seems to be the core takeaway for many observers. Reports suggest the developers were somewhat resistant to cooperation. Not just with foreign partners, which can sometimes be tricky in defense projects due to sensitivities, but apparently also with local private companies and even academic institutions within India.
Really, even domestic cooperation was an issue.
That's what's reported. This kind of insular, go-it-alone approach likely hampered progress significantly. It prevented them from leveraging broader expertise. And beyond just management style, there was also a demonstrable lack within India's defense industry of certain critical technologies needed for advanced engine development. We're talking not just complex components, but even fundamental expertise in things like advanced metallurgy, materials science, the basic building blocks. This technological gap acted like a ceiling, keeping the project stuck for decades.
That's a really significant insight. The idea that the problems were less about, the physics of building an engine and more about the management of the entire scientific and industrial effort.
It seems that way, yes. The organizational aspect looms large.
Okay, so what does all this mean for India's actual defense capabilities right now, particularly for the Tejas fighter, which was supposed to get this engine?
Well, the immediate direct consequence is that the Tejas aircraft being produced are still reliant on imported American engines, those General Electric F-404s we mentioned. And this reliance has created its own set of headaches. There have been reports of shortages, supply delays for these imported engines, which in turn actually slows down the production line for the Tejas jets themselves. So it directly undermines the original strategic goal of the Kaveri program, which was, of course, independence and self-reliance.
Right. The very thing it was meant to achieve is being hampered by its failure.
Exactly. It's a difficult paradox.
And yet, despite all these struggles with getting a fourth-generation engine working, India is still very publicly looking towards the future. They're talking fifth-generation aircraft. They displayed a mock-up of their AMCA fighter concept at Aero India 2025. How do they square that ambition with the Kaveri experience?
It is a complex picture, definitely. What seems to be happening with the Kaveri program now is it's being adapted, or perhaps repurposed. The plan now involves developing a less powerful variant of the Kaveri engine, specifically for an unmanned aerial vehicle, the DRDO Ghatak UAV, which is seen as India's counterpart to something like Russia's S-70 Okhotnik stealth drone.
Ah, so shifting focus to a drone engine.
Yes. Now, engines for UAVs generally have lower performance requirements than those for manned fighter jets, which might make the task, let's say, potentially easier. However, taking a program with decades of known reliability issues and splitting its focus, diverting resources to this UAV application, well, it raises serious questions about efficiency and whether this is the best path forward, even for the drone program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, officials involved in these kinds of projects often argue that advanced jet engine technology is just incredibly sensitive, something nations are very reluctant to share. It's closely guarded tech. But our sources seem to highlight some recent developments that kind of challenge that narrative, don't they?
They do, yes. That argument about technology secrecy is certainly common, and there's truth to it, but it's not the whole story. India itself has recently made pretty significant progress precisely through collaboration. For instance, they've already finalized an agreement for the local production of U.S. GE F414 engines. That's a more advanced GE engine than the F404. And crucially, this deal includes a substantial 80% technology transfer.
80%. That's quite high for this kind of tech.
It is. And furthermore, there's active cooperation underway with France's Safran group, specifically focused on developing an engine suitable for a future fifth-generation fighter. So these examples clearly demonstrate that technology transfer and international collaboration are achievable. It suggests maybe the earlier resistance to cooperation, the insularity we talked about, might have been more of a self-imposed barrier than an absolute refusal from potential partners.
That's a really powerful counterpoint. It shows that going it completely alone wasn't necessarily the only path available. Now, digging a bit deeper, some Indian experts do push back against calling Kaveri an outright failure. What's their argument? What's the counter-narrative?
Their perspective generally is that even without delivering a production engine, the Kaveri program wasn't a total loss. They argue it served as a crucial technological learning exercise. It helps build a foundational knowledge base within India, develop some domestic capabilities, trained engineers. Essentially, it provided valuable experience, even through failure, a stepping stone, perhaps.
So a very expensive, very long stepping stone.
Well, yes. The caveat, of course, is that without a finished operational engine to show for it after all this time, it's impossible to really gauge how solid that foundation is, or predict how many more years and resources it might take to actually get tangible results based on that learning. Which leads many analysts back to the same conclusion. The most important lesson from the Kaveri saga might not be technical at all. It's not about whether India can eventually build an engine. It's organizational. It's a case study in how not to manage a large, complex, high-stakes national defense program. That seems to be the enduring, if perhaps painful, takeaway.
That organizational lesson really does stand out, doesn't it? It goes far beyond just the nuts and bolts, the engineering specifics. It's about the whole ecosystem: leadership, strategy, collaboration, realistic planning.
Absolutely. The whole system needs to work together.
So let me leave you, our listener, with this thought to consider. If the primary lesson from India's nearly 40-year quest for its own jet engine is fundamentally about how not to manage such a critical national program, what does that imply for other nations out there who are pursuing their own complex, high-stakes goals of technological independence in defense or other critical sectors? What can they learn from this? And that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Thank you so much for your time and participation.
Thank you.
We really hope this exploration has given you a clearer picture of the immense challenges and perhaps the critical lessons stemming from India's long journey with the Kaveri jet engine program. If you found this analysis insightful, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to like this video, perhaps share it with others who might be interested, and of course, subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network for more analyses like this one. We'd also genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this complex topic. What's your take on the Kaveri situation? Please share your perspectives in the comments section below. You can also join the conversation on our social media channels. You'll find all the links conveniently provided in the description. Until next time, stay informed.